Welcome to part 2 of our do-it-yourself garden design video series, showing how to create your own custom landscape design using the Inland Valley Garden Planner website. In this video, part 2, we will be exploring the turf replacement rebates currently available to water customers in Southern California if you are removing a lawn and are going to be replacing it with a qualifying water-wise or California native landscape. Your lawn doesn't necessarily need to be beautiful and green. However, you do need to have turf still remaining, as shown in this picture. And the main resource for learning about rebates and applying, no matter which water company you get your water from, is going to be SoCalWatersmart.com. SoCalWatersmart.com is a centralized website that was created by the Metropolitan Water District, which is the main water wholesaler of imported water throughout Southern California. And so even though local water suppliers contribute to the rebates, the centralized source, no matter where you get your water from, is always going to be SoCalWatersmart.com for the main rebate information. And so when you arrive at SoCalWatersmart.com, it's going to ask you if you're interested in residential or commercial rebates. For homeowners, you will go to the residential rebates section. And then under rebates, there is a drop down for available rebates, and you can select the turf replacement program and learn all of the details there. But in this video, we are going to explore some of the top questions that I find and also explore some of the answers to the questions where people tend to get confused with the rebate application process. And so quickly, in addition to the turf replacement rebates, which are the main one that is going to potentially help you fund your turf replacement project, there's also a number of other good rebates available through the website for landscape projects. Another one is the weather-based irrigation controller rebate, which provides at least an $80 rebate per controller. In some local areas, the incentives are higher, and when you apply for any of these rebates, or you can even check ahead of time, you can put in the information for your weather provider or your water provider and your address, and it will tell you exactly what rebate to expect. But the minimum is $80, and these weather-based irrigation controllers are a new generation of irrigation controller, which will tell your irrigation system when to turn on and off based on your settings, but they also have settings which will allow them to automatically adjust the number of minutes your controller runs throughout the year based on what the weather has been. In addition to that, many of the more modern ones are also able to log on to a home Wi-Fi system, which means the whole interface of how you can control your irrigation controller can be done from a phone or a computer, and is much more intuitive and much easier to make modifications and check in on things when you need to. So if you don't have a weather-based irrigation controller, it's definitely something to look into. And then depending on where you go in the direction of irrigation with your turf replacement project, if you have a large enough site, there is potentially a rotating sprinkler nozzle rebate. And so part of the requirement for the turf replacement project is that a lawn irrigation system must be converted to either drip, a high efficiency irrigation spray system, or to be completely disconnected and hand watering can happen. That high efficiency spray system basically relies on these higher efficiency rotating sprinkler nozzles, and there is a minimum rebate of at least $2 per nozzle, which won't pay for the whole thing, but will help if you are replacing at least 30 nozzles. So some people's properties will be too small. For example, my front yard, when I did the turf replacement rebate, we didn't have 30 nozzles, so we would not have qualified. But if you have a large enough yard, you may very well qualify for that. And in addition to these rebates through SoCalWatersmart.com, some water providers also have additional local conservation programs and incentives. So if you're interested, the best thing to do is also contact your local water provider. Sometimes water providers will have a conservation section on their website, which will have all of those details. Sometimes it's best to call, and you can always start with the customer service person and let them know that you are interested in any conservation programs and incentives, and they should either be able to provide you that information or connect you with the right person who can. But for the turf replacement rebate, we're now going to go through the requirements to be able to get that rebate. And the first basic requirement is that you need to live in a community within the Metropolitan Water District's service area. And that is much of Southern California, and it's all of the communities that can be seen on this map here. So from San Diego in the south up through Riverside, Inland Empire area, through Orange County, all of Los Angeles area, and a bit farther north through Simi Valley, Camarillo, and Oxnard. And you can always go onto the website, and there's a section that says estimate my rebate, and you can put in your basic information, and it will confirm whether or not you qualify and what exactly your potential rebate would be. In addition to that, there's a lot of other basic requirements. The main next requirement is that you will be removing a lawn of some sort. Doesn't need to be beautiful, pristine, and green, but you will be removing a lawn and replacing it with what is defined by them, or what is called by them, drought-tolerant landscape. That's basically any sort of water-wise or California native landscaping. And they're pretty flexible on that, but the big idea is that you're replacing a lawn and are going to be putting in lower water landscaping. The lawn doesn't need to be perfectly green, like I said. The first slide on this slideshow was, in fact, the state of my front yard when I applied for the turf replacement rebate. So they don't require you to use a bunch of water to green up a lawn that hasn't been watered for a while. However, all the thatch of the turf must still be there, and usually even a pretty brown lawn, should I start watering it again, enough of the lawn would return. So that's the idea, is that it's never going to be a lawn again in the foreseeable future. It's going to be replaced by low water landscaping. However, if you are truly down to dirt or a patch of weeds, that will not qualify because it's a turf replacement rebate, not just funding for putting in a water-wise garden. The lawn, when it is removed, must be replaced by a project that meets certain qualifications. And here are the main qualifications. There needs to be a certain plant density. So this is not a rebate that's going to pay, for example, for the lawn to be removed and then wall-to-wall gravel going in with just like 3 cactuses or something like that. You can have a succulent garden if you want, but you are going to need to install a minimum of 3 plants per 100 square feet of the area being rebated, so of the turf being removed. So for example, if you are going to get a rebate for removing 1,000 square feet of turf area, you are going to need to put in at least 30 plants. And it just so happens that if you're designing a nice landscape that's going to look good when it grows in, it's really easy to meet that 3 plants per 100 square foot requirements. You're also going to need to put in some sort of stormwater retention feature, and we will talk about that more a little bit later in the video. That's basically something like a dry stream bed where when water falls on the property in our rare rain events that we do have, whether it's coming off of the roof or from a driveway or a paved area, there's going to be something in the landscape to capture and hold on to some of that water. So instead of letting it just rush out onto the street, it's going to be captured. In a small rain event, it will help hydrate the garden a little bit better. And over time, and with large rain events, it might actually help recharge the local groundwater aquifer, which is very important. Most communities are needing to rely more and more on local groundwater these days, and it's only going to continue to go that way in the future. So we need to make sure we are capturing as much of that as possible. The next requirement is that within the rebated area, there can't be any new hardscape that is not permeable to water or to rain when it falls. So basically that means that you can't put down any new concrete or asphalt or pavers that are grouted in. Basically no new surfaces that when water falls on it, that water is going to run off and away out of that paved area. You can use permeable hardscape, so think things like a gravel path or a patio, or a decomposed granite path or patio, and we'll be looking at those materials and many examples of those features later on in this series of videos. Because with those sorts of pathways or patios, those materials actually will allow the rainwater to soak in through them and continue down into the soil underneath. So they're not creating that runoff situation. And then also remember that if you are going to be putting in, for example, some permeable hardscape like a gravel patio, that you are still going to need to meet the total plant requirements for the rebated area. So for example, if you do have that 1,000 square foot landscape and you put in a 100 square foot gravel patio, you're still going to need to put 30 plants total into the landscape. And so that 100 square foot, 3 plants per 100 square foot requirement does not mean that each individual 100 square feet requires 3 plants. Rather, it means for the total area, it must meet that general requirement. So if you have some paths and patios, you're going to have a little bit higher plant density elsewhere. Or some areas you might have fewer large plants, and other areas you might have more small plants. The next requirement is related to irrigation. So if you're removing turf or a lawn, the typical turf irrigation system is not going to work for your new WaterWise landscape. In just a practical matter, the small either 2-inch or 4-inch pop-ups from most turf irrigation systems are not going to work for a more varied height landscape. What would normally happen is that the closest plant to each of those spray heads would get way too much water. Everything on the other side of that plant would be very, very dry, and it would not be efficient at all. But in addition to that, most spray sprinklers are not very efficient devices for getting water to the right place. Anyways, there's a lot of misting, and if there's any wind, a lot of the water doesn't go to the right place. And so an additional requirement is that you're going to need to either replace or modify to a more high efficiency system any overhead spray sprinklers that were in the project area. And so your options are either to completely disconnect them and remove or cap the sprinklers and then proceed with only hand watering, which can be done for very low water landscapes for people who want to spend that time investment and interact that much with their landscape is an option. Or it can be converted to drip irrigation, which sometimes can use all of that underground piping and cap most of the sprinklers and then have some adapters that will then feed from the valve through those underground pipes to new drip irrigation that can be on top of the soil surface but underneath a mulch layer. Or it can be converted to high efficiency rotating sprinkler nozzles, which we'll talk a little bit more about in other videos. But even if you do that, generally you will need to do some work to put them on a taller, what's called a riser, a pipe sticking out of the ground, to make sure that they will still spray over the closest plants and get farther into the landscape than they would otherwise with those low pop-ups in a turf irrigation system. And then a final requirement, which I did not type out on this page, is that the project area in the landscape areas is going to need to be mulched. It's going to need to have a 3-inch layer of mulch, which is basically a material covering the surface. The most common kind of mulch is wood chip mulch, and that is kind of the default requirement for the program. Sometimes either gravel or decomposed granite will be used as a mulch surface in different types of landscapes. However, there is a requirement that immediately around the plants, an organic or easier called wood chip mulch would be immediately around the plants. So those are all of the main requirements for the project, and most of these are things that are good ideas or will be part of a well-designed landscape anyways. So even though it seems like there's a lot of things you need to do to qualify, this is really guidance to make sure that the projects that are going in and rebated are well thought out projects that are going to be a good reflection of the way landscapes should be evolving in our Southern California communities. And so something that you're definitely going to want to do if you're going to be applying for this rebate is to know how much your rebate is going to be. So on the SoCalWatersmart.com website, you can go to a section called Estimate Your Rebate, and you'll put in all of your address information, your water provider, and what rebate you are going to be applying for. And for the turf replacement rebate, the total square feet of turf you're going to be removing and applying for the rebate for. And then you can estimate the amount because it might be different depending on where you are. The base rebate right now in 2021, as I'm recording this video, is $2 per square foot. And so in our local communities where we are based, in the city of Montclair and the WaterWise Community Center, these are the local rebate amounts. It's a minimum of $2 per square foot. And in Pomona or Claremont, that's where things are. On the San Bernardino County side, where our service area is, the local water agencies contribute a little bit more to increase the incentive. And so if your water providers are on one of these lists, then that's a good indicator of where you are going to be with the rebate per square foot of turf removed. But I always encourage people to use that estimate my rebate because that will reflect current rebate rates if there are any changes, and you'll be able to get that information for whatever community you live in. Now we're going to move into some rebate application tips. Definitely read all of the information at SoCalWatersmart.com about the turf replacement rebate. But here are the requests for information that I get the most on the program or where I see people sometimes getting confused. The absolute most important thing to remember is you cannot begin any work on your project until after you have received approval for your rebate. So what that means is when you apply for the rebate, you need to apply before you do any work on your yard before the turf is removed. You need to still have that turf at the time you apply for the rebate. When you formally apply for the rebate and you provide them with all the information that they need, there will be a processing time of usually around 1 to 2 weeks. It depends on how many people are applying. And then you will hear back from them, and you will find out then that your rebate has officially been approved, or your application has been approved to participate in the program. And after you receive that approval, you will have 180 days to complete the work. But if you start the work before you receive your approval, you can lose your qualification for the rebate. And they actually do spot check and send people out to audit and visit some of the properties to make sure that the turf is still available. So huge thing, you cannot begin any work on the project until you have received approval for your rebate. And then here are some other tips. You're going to need to create a login with an email address and a password. And a lot of the information that they're going to want is very simple: name, address, that sort of stuff. You are also going to need to tell them your total lot size. Some people don't have that information handy. And this is not just the project area size, but the total square footage of the lot for the property. The easiest way to quickly find this is you can type in any address into any search engine. And what is going to happen is that the first search results are going to be automatically generated property profiles from all the major real estate websites. And so you'll get something like this. So this is what I received after typing into Google the property address for our WaterWise Community Center property. And so this just happens to be one of the popular real estate websites, Zillow. and you'll get just an automatically generated profile off of a database from each of these. And then somewhere on that, there will be a total lot size that you can see. So you can see here down in the lower right, there is the lot size, which, because we are a large commercial property, is showing as 8.14 acres. But for any residential property, it will be showing as square footage. So that's going to be the number that you will need. You will also need to have already decided which areas of your turf are going to be transformed through the rebate and how many square feet that needs to be, each of front, side, and or backyard. Remember that the rebate is going to pay per square foot up to 5,000 total square feet. And so if you happen to have 10,000 square feet of turf that you want to remove, that's fine, but the rebate will pay only up to 5,000 square feet. This may or may not cover the entire cost of the project, depending on many factors. And in a later video, we will talk more about cost. But for most people, don't assume that the entire cost of your project is going to be paid for by the turf replacement rebate, especially if you're hiring a contractor, but it will help offset the cost of the project. If you are doing all of the work and buying all of the materials yourself, depending on what you are planning, it may cover the entire cost, but don't assume it's going to cover the entire cost. You're definitely going to want to look at your budget and know that this will contribute to it. You can apply once per fiscal year for different projects. So for example, if you do your front yard and complete that 1 year, then the next year, if there's still funding available, you can apply and complete your backyard. The Metropolitan Water District's fiscal year runs from July through June, and so that would be the calendar on which you would be able to potentially apply again if you are doing multiple projects over multiple years. When you are measuring out your areas that will be transformed, you have a couple of options. The easiest and best approach for most projects on relatively simple properties in terms of the layout of the front yard or the backyard, if it's kind of square or rectangular, is just to measure the area with a measuring tape and do the calculations. However, some people have kind of awkward shaped landscape areas. There's maybe curves because of driveways or other irregularities. And if that is the case, and if you don't have a lot of tree canopy on your lot so that the aerial imagery that can be provided by Google Maps or on Google Earth, which is a downloadable free program, shows your project area well, there are measuring tools on those programs or that website that you can actually use to get some pretty accurate measurements. They're not going to be as accurate as hand measuring, but the process works pretty well. And then the final thing to keep in mind related to the size and measurements of your application is that your application must have at least 250 square feet of turf being removed unless the total landscape area is less than 250 square feet, in which case you must be removing all of the turf. And then, for example, if you only have 200 square feet of turf in a very small front yard and you're removing all of it, then you can qualify for the rebate. But if you have, for example, a 500 square foot or 1,000 square foot front yard, you need to be removing at least 250 square feet. In addition to the measurements, you are also going to need to tell them at the time of application which, quote, stormwater retention feature approach you are going to use, and whether that will be a rain garden, rock garden, dry riverbed, swale, berms, rain barrels, or cistern. There is information and pictures of each of those approaches on the SoCal Water Smart website with the information about the turf replacement program. But essentially what it is you're going to need to have some sort of feature that's going to hold on to water when it rains. And usually in most landscapes, the most functional and easiest way to do that is to have some low area in the landscape, like you can see on the right, that is going to capture some water, usually coming off the roof of the property and holding onto it and letting it infiltrate in the landscape. We'll talk more about that later. And like I mentioned before, you're going to need to tell them the total number of plants that are going to be planted as part of the project. You're also going to need to upload through the website a copy of your recent water bill, a copy of your landscape plan. Now, don't be intimidated by that. It doesn't need to be a work of art. They are not trying to make it be something where you need to work with a professional designer. It just needs to be a drawing that shows what you intend to do with your new landscape. If you work your way through this whole series of videos, the plan you come up with at the end of that for yourself will absolutely qualify, as long as it meets all of the other requirements for the rebated projects that we have already covered. After that, you can apply for the rebate program, and then after you have your approval, you have 180 days to complete the project. You're going to need to upload photos of your project area showing the landscape with the existing turf as part of what you're going to need to upload to apply. And then once you complete your project, you upload completed photos of your new landscape, and then you could formally request your rebate. And then after another processing and approval period, you will receive your rebate check in the mail. So to be clear about that, if you are participating in this program, you are upfronting all of the costs for the project. And then after showing them that the project has been successfully completed, you will receive your rebate check in the mail. And then one important thing to keep in mind is that for federal tax law, you will receive tax documentation through the Metropolitan Water District at the end of the year, and you will need to declare on your taxes as income any rebate over $600. So it's still a very good deal. However, if you're going to be removing 3,000 square feet of turf and, for example, getting a $6,000 rebate, plan for that as you plan for your taxes. And so this is the example of the state of my yard when I applied. And with the pictures that you take, one final tip, you're not going to want to do any close-ups of plants or close-ups of turf. What they're looking for is pictures that identify, yes, this is existing turf, even if it's not beautiful, on your property. So it can be from different angles, but capturing a little bit of the house, the garage, or something like that in the background is what they will be looking for. So that's the rundown of figuring out whether or not you will qualify for the turf replacement rebate program. It's probably not going to cover the cost of your entire landscape project, especially if you're hiring a contractor. If you're thrifty with your budget, there's a good chance it can cover your costs if you're doing all of the work and buying all of the materials yourself. But it will be something that can help make projects happen for a lot of people. So join us for our next video, where we will start to look at the very first things you should be considering when you are thinking about taking on a landscape renovation project, starting with figuring out what your goals are going to be for your new garden.